Hello and welcome back to the AI Ethics Now podcast. My name is Tom Ritchie, and today I'm really pleased to be joined by Alfrun, writer, performer, and the creative force behind Dead Air, a darkly comic solo show that's been turning heads since its acclaimed run at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and it's now coming to the Greenwich Theatre in London on the 13th to the 16th of May. Alfrun's work sits at a fascinating intersection: personal grief, AI grief technology, and the ethical questions that arise when companies offer to digitally resurrect the people that we've lost. Inspired by her own experience of bereavement, she spent considerable time researching the real-world AI tools that claim to keep the conversation going after death. And what she found shapes every moment of the play. Dead Air isn't just theatre, it's a timely interrogation of who these tools are really serving and at what cost to the people processing grief. Alfrun, hello.
Hi.
How you doing? You okay?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, thank you. Not too bad at all. I wonder, Alfrun, what brings you to this conversation on AI ethics, please?
I wrote a show called Dead Air, as you just said, a dark comedy about an AI resurrection service. But originally, I wasn't going to write about AI at all. My dad died in 2023, much beloved man who had about 500 people at his funeral, and it was live streamed around the world. And after he died, a lot of people immediately started talking about ways that I could talk to him. My friends were saying that they spoke to their dad as a bird in the garden. And my cousin actually came to me and told me that my dad had come to him in a dream. And I was absolutely furious because I thought, why didn't he come to me? And then I, phoned my sister and cried about it. And then we sort of laughed about it so much because we thought, well, no, Dad would never even do that because he was an atheist and he would be too stubborn to just sort of turn up in a dream. And we were joking that even if we went to a medium, he wouldn't turn up because he'd want to keep that sort of illusion going that there was nothing after death. So I thought it would be really funny because my dad was a really funny guy. He had a really dark sense of humor. He was Icelandic and I think he got away with a lot. So I thought it would be interesting to try and talk to him because I think that's, something that we all want to do really. But I was being stopped by my own I thought, well, no, Dad would never come back to me or be a ghost or any of that stuff. He didn't believe in that, so I shouldn't believe in that. And I don't believe in that. But the sort of need, I think the very animal base need, we've been doing it since time immemorial, resurrecting the dead, Jesus, famous story, Osiris before him, and ghosts and all sorts of necromancy and all sorts of ways that human beings have been trying to resurrect the dead. So I started thinking about that in sort of terms of mediums, and I thought it would be really funny to do a seance. And my dad wouldn't turn up, but all of the other members of my historical family my ancestors would turn up to that instead. But then I sort of stumbled across a documentary, and it was in 2024, early in 2024. So I think we were all just sort of getting our heads around ChatGPT, I'd used the beta version and really thought nothing of it because I just thought, oh, it's a sort of sophisticated search tool. And it sort of reminded me of when people were talking to Siri and she didn't understand anything that they were saying. So I just sort of, I was doing an MA in writing and it was all very don't use AI, don't touch it. And so I didn't really look at it further. And I stumbled across this documentary called Eternal You, which follows the rise of AI chat tools that are essentially used to resurrect the dead through AI. There's one that they follow, which is called Project December. And there's another one called Replica and You, Only Virtual. I think people have probably heard of them now because there's been a few documentaries on the BBC and stuff like that. But at the time, I don't think anyone really knew about it, or not in my circle of friends, at least in the sort of creative arts industries. So I thought, well, that's really serendipitous. I'm thinking about a play that would talk about the sort of human need to resurrect and sort of, are we talking to ourselves when we were talking to ghosts? Are we really sort of managing, or is this big scam? Are these mediums, just scammers that are taking our money and lying to us? I mean, obviously I think they are, but I don't necessarily think that they're not helping people. So I thought that was an interesting question. So this came along and I thought, yeah, bingo. It's like zeitgeisty, people will be interested, and I'm really interested and curious how this works.
Whilst you come at it from perhaps a different perspective than a lot of people that we speak to, you're still asking the same set of questions,
Yeah.
which is really, what does it mean to be human? So much of the discussion and the discourse around AI is asking us to interrogate who we are in relation to technology, who we are in relation to each other, what are our values, what do we stand for, and your focus on death. Well, death is one of it's the only guarantee of being human. And I think the role that AI tools play with this needs to be considered and needs to be discussed. And so I wonder, with that in mind, AI grief companies that you mentioned, they often frame their products as comfort and continuity for people who are in that moment needing that.
hmm
What's your critique of how they market themselves to people at their most vulnerable?
Well, it's kind of where to start, to be honest. I mean, it's not just this kind of technology, but specifically AI grief companions are marketed directly to people who are grieving through an algorithm, just like any technology or any product, really. So I think it's difficult because, AI companies sort of work in tandem with other tech companies who've mined your data and are selling it through targeted advertising. And my mum got one the other day, which was something like corny about an angel, like speak to your angel or something. And I mean, I think that's really shameless. I just, and I mean, I think just like any marketing technique, they needle directly into the pain. And we all know that the internet runs on pain and suffering and hate. And they sort of market themselves by saying, you know, you don't have to suffer. And I think that that's kind of a problematic condition that we're in right now. We're sort of conditioned to believe that we don't have to suffer in any way, that we can sort of circumvent the human condition by buying whatever product alleviates our suffering. Like I get a lot of advertising for beauty products because I don't know, I'm a woman in my 30s, and so I guess it's my right not to have any blemishes, or and that I should be comfortable in my skin, in my body, in my mind. And I think everything is sold with that premise, like that suffering is bad and here's a product that can solve it. We all know that marketing is probably the most powerful engine in the world right now. I think all I can do as an artist is, in the play, I critique these companies by making the face of the company a human being. So it's a different human being every time that responds on the phone. And it is a phone because that's just easier dramaturgically, but also because I think that we're moving into a place where we know that we're never going to get in contact with a human, right? So we pay extra to talk to someone on the phone, for example. So I thought that was quite interesting. I was inspired by a book called, I think it was called Blackfish, where they sort of look at a dystopian future where AI sort of runs everything, except for they have a human receptionist because people trust them more. So I thought it'd be quite funny to have a woman called Hayley, and she's just like preppy a little bit, but nice and had a kind voice, and that she's always a different person, but she's always called the same name because that's how the sort of the brand keeps itself stable. So in the show, for example, the protagonist, Alfie, is already in this service. So she doesn't get sort of drawn in by some marketing that's from outside. She's already addicted to the service, but they keep trying to sort of make her pay for upgrades, to customize his outfit, or pay for a storage fee, because otherwise she can't go back into the data that she's pulled already. Or you get 15% off your next one. So the ethical stuff, which they sort of try and reappropriate for themselves. So like I was quite interested in the guardrails that AI companies use. And, within these sort of chatbots, for example, ChatGPT, they have internal guardrails, and they've made them stronger recently because they've been, sued by people who've lost their loved ones because of chats that they've had and have allegedly led to suicide. Yeah, so I was interested in how these services, these AI chatbots, have guardrails. And so in the show, the protagonist starts talking about ending her life or somebody else's life, and the Hayley, the woman, sort of intervenes and says, you need to speak to a suicide helpline, or you need to go to A&E. And then she phones up and she says, "Oh, I was only joking. I didn't mean it." And immediately the chat's restored. And I think that is true to a certain extent. I experimented with various chats on how I could circumvent these guardrails by saying that I'm using this creatively, or I'm an actor, or that I'm writing this and this is a creative exercise. I have been, up until recently, quite easily able to circumvent these guardrails. And it's become a little bit more stringent, but I'm interested in the fact that these companies only move on these things when they're made to. And it's not like a process that anyone thought internally inside the company, "Oh, yeah, we better make sure that nobody dies from this." Yeah. So I think it's sort of interesting how we are being marketed to by companies almost as an experiment. And it feels weird.
And you've touched on this really interesting, are companies reactive or proactive with how they're managing these tools? And I wonder, thinking about your show and the messages that you want it to be able to share with people, where do you draw the line between something that's genuinely helping people grieve and something that's exploiting grief from people?
So I think that people talk about grief as if it's a somewhat decided what is helpful already. So they talk about, in response to these chat tools, they're horrified and they say, "Well, you have to go through grief," as if it's some sort of process that's already sort of set in stone. That's quite a strange way to look at it. From my perspective, it's like, well, we've always done things to help us with grief and used new technologies, photographs. Weirdly, the thing that kept playing in my mind when I was writing this show was a scene in Buffy the Vampire Slayer where this woman is watching sort of old recordings of her son who's died. And she just sits there and like a zombie watching them over and over and over again. And I think, we've always done things to help ourselves with latest technology updates. Even, my niece, she wore my dad's clothes for, a few weeks after he died because that was just sort of what she wanted to do. I don't know where I draw the line. I know that I think it's dangerous to just set this technology loose on vulnerable users without having done any research on how it affects people. I've read some interesting research where they've said that if you use the AI in a sort of safe environment with therapists, and it's set up with limitations so you can only use it there, and you know what you're getting into something that might be a therapeutic tool where you imagine almost like the AI is like an actor that's helping you have a conversation that you might need to have. Because, not everyone's as lucky as I am. Not everybody has a parent that's died that they liked even. I really loved my dad, and I have the knowledge that he loved me. And I think, at my dad's funeral, so many people came and said to me, "Oh, my dad was this and my dad was that." And my dad lost his dad when he was 13, and it was a really unfinished conversation. And I wonder sometimes, if given the opportunity, whether he would use it to talk to his dad. So I don't know how to answer that question apart from, I think more thoughtful research needs to be done before it's just set loose on the public as if it's something that we can all just cope with, which I don't think we can, because we're animals. We have animal brains, and we worry about kids playing video games, for God's sakes. Like, it's like, what if you're confronted with somebody that you love or hate or whatever that's dead in front of you, both visually or in text, and how do you deal with that? I don't know. How does your brain, which we don't even understand before we get onto AI and the black box that is, our brains are a black box. We don't understand our brains.
I think it's a really interesting answer, and you've touched on the idea of persistence after death. And actually, almost it's a core part of the human condition that when we experience death, we try to make whoever has died persist, whether, as you say, that's photographs, stories. We do these things as human beings, as animals, to try to push back against that. And I think there is potentially a role for AI in that, as you mentioned, around supporting people in a therapeutic context. But you're right. The key importance is not to just wholesale apply this, because as we see, when you do that with this technology in any context, it's problematic. And I think one of the parts that's really interesting in the play is that Alfie can adjust her AI dad's temperament when he doesn't do what she wants. What do you think that says about the nature of these relationships and perhaps about grief itself?
I was really inspired. I think that this was the thing that I found most dramaturgically interesting. And by dramaturgically, I guess I just mean what sort of helps me as a storyteller create conflict in the story. So I found it really compelling that, in the back end of AI, I don't know if that's the right term, that there's temperature control. So in my understanding, it's a control that makes the AI generate more human-like responses. So on a scale of 1 to 10, which it is in my show, 10 being the highest temperature, and tells the AI to be more creative, with its responses, and essentially more risky, to take the sort of patterns that it's analysed and make the most human-like response that it can. Whereas at 1, it's taking less risks and adhering more closely to the data. So I liken it, because all of my friends are actors, I liken it to an actor reading off a script versus an improv actor who's been given like a character and a set of circumstances and maybe an object, and just sort of like wheelhouses it and has a yes and response to everything. So the actor reading of the script is the lowest temperature and the improv actor is the highest. And we get into problems with both ends of the scale, right? So we get into problems if it's making too much up at the highest temperature, because then we go, well, hang on, they would never have said that. That's kind of weird. And then we get into problems when the temperature's at its lowest, because it's a bit boring and not very believable or exciting, I suppose. Right at the beginning of the play, Alfie talks to her dad for the first time that we see in the play. And he says, "Oh, you're looking a bit fat." And she's like, "Okay, well, that is something that my dad might say." Not my dad, but that's something that a parent might say, right? Like that's normal. Like, that's okay. It's a bit annoying, but that's just our relationship. And then he says something. She says that she's had a miscarriage. And he makes fun of the name that she was going to give the child. And that sort of crosses her line a little bit, and she sort of pauses. And the AI responds by saying, oh, sorry, was that too much? You could turn my temperature down by phoning the helpline. And she's like, well, what does that do? And he says, well, it will make me less of a dick, but it will also make me less funny. So it's your choice, really. And then throughout the show, she's sort of experienced turning temperature up and down, because he keeps sort of either crossing the line or being too boring or not, responding in the right way. And I think that's, most of the show is kind of about our perspectives on other people. Like in philosophy, I did philosophy as a degree a very long time ago, but we only really perceive the world as it is to us. And so in relationship with other human beings, we sort of go, well, you look like me, you sort of do the same things as me, so you must feel the same way as I do. But then when we put that onto an AI, which is essentially like mimicry, like a high-end statistical mimic, it becomes even weirder. And then the fact that I'm paying for this service, and in a capitalist society, right, I pay for this service, and so I have the right not to suffer, and I have the right to, get what I can for me out of this service. There's something in that means that it becomes a conversation with yourself. This protagonist who's addicted to the service, she's not really necessarily addicted to hearing her dad say, "I'm proud of you," or "I love you," or something like that. She's kind of addicted to the idea that she is talking to herself, really. I don't like banding about the term narcissist, but it's a sort of narcissistic way to live your lives. And I think that we are dealing with that kind of echo chamber in, everything to do with social media as well. But specifically in this context, it can't be good to be having a conversation with another human being and just be able to, turn the volume down when you don't like what you hear. That can't be sort of character building. But that's what I mean. Like, nobody wants to suffer. But then again, the AI dad probably isn't saying exactly what the real dad would say, but how do we know what the real dad would say? The AI is essentially like a nostalgia tool. It's just sort of, resurfacing everything that we liked about the person, but not the things that we don't like. And I think that's a danger in using these tools. And I think that is probably the sort of most heartbreaking thing about it as well. I found it quite heartbreaking when I watched that Eternal You documentary. There was a woman in South Korea that went on a TV show, and they did a whole like VR experience where she saw her deceased daughter. And it was heartbreaking because you watched from the camera's angle, like of the whole green screen behind her, and she was trying to hug the air when she first saw the daughter. But then afterwards she said, it was really nice to see her face and hear her voice, but she wasn't very naughty like she usually is. She just kept, doing things that were sweet, and it wasn't really like my child. And I think that's sort of the best example that I can give of how sycophancy and all of these elements that an AI uses as an inbuilt into the technology and sort of into the services, because they want you to keep using, right? It's like a drug dealer. They want you to keep using. And so if they do something or make it so that the chatbot is too harsh or too real with you, we've all experienced it when we've used chatbots, this sort of idea of sycophancy where it would just agree with you. And I think that's what I was kind of trying to point out in the play, is that I don't think it's good for us to be agreed with all the time. And I don't think it's healthy in any relationship. We need more critical thinking. We need more sort of pushback.
It needs to be real, I think, is what you're kind of alluding to. Because of the way that AI systems are trained, what you're describing is this kind of facsimile of a person. It brings us back to this idea of uncanny valley effect as well, of it looks and appears to be human, but isn't quite. And I wonder, Alfrun, your show is intentionally analog. So no AI was used in the performance itself. Was that a deliberate ethical statement that you made?
Yeah, I mean, it has nothing to do with my lack of budget or skill to do. But no, really, the point I'm trying to make, you have to think about it from somebody who is creative, who's working in an industry that is really skeptical of AI. We're terrified of AI taking our jobs for this very reason, the deep fake puppetry and, the fact that it can scan our faces, and we're already dealing with, companies trying to steal our voices and stuff like that. So I'm talking to an audience who is, and to the general public, I think a lot of people are skeptical. So I thought, let me do a show about AI without AI, like any AI. I could have used something, but I decided that the point is that I'm talking about this technology and I'm sort of introducing it to people. A lot of people came out of the show and they went, "Oh my gosh, it's like Black Mirror." And I was like, "No, it's not like Black Mirror, because Black Mirror is a dystopian future. It's real. Everything I say in the show about the technology is true." I think that's more likely to get people to the show, to be quite honest, because it's people, I had a friend actually in Edinburgh who was doing an amazing experiment. She's an artist and she was using AI in her show. And it was, there were like 5 people working on it daily behind it, and it seemed very complicated. And people were immediately put off just because there was AI in it. She literally got hate messages on Instagram and stuff like that. So, and that's somebody who's using it and interrogating it, and using it artistically. So I thought it's probably safer for me not to do that, and it's more transportable. But yeah, I think the point of my show is to interrogate the technology. And I think we can ask the questions without using the technology live in front of people. People are obsessed with truth these days. And I think that's because there's so much fakery, right? So I think that was quite interesting to play around with that idea of what's true and what's not, and stretching the truth and all of that in the show. And yeah, so that's why I made it intentionally analog. And also I get to play 6, 7 characters myself, which is always a dream for an actor.
And I think whatever discipline you come at this from, it is important. And that's why we teach the course that we do, and we don't teach it just from a, say, computer science perspective. We want people to think about it from a philosophical point of view, from a dramatic point of view, because this is important. And it asks us a lot of questions about what does it mean to be human. And you touched on something as well of just because we can, does it mean we should? And I think that's a big question for technology moving forward. Just because we can create AI grief tools, is that the best use of this technology when we begin to think about social impact, climate impact, or are there better places that we could focus it, like health imaging? For the last question, What steps do you think that we can take to ensure a more positive future with AI, please?
Well, I think on what you just said, I just wanted to say I think a lot about my birth country, Iceland, being the sort of best place for server farms. And I wonder if we're going to use AI technology to create ghosts in server farms to keep ourselves alive. And not everyone is going to be able to be kept alive because not everyone's going to have the money for the storage. So I just wonder, yeah, exactly, what is the best use for this technology? In terms of taking steps to ensure a positive future with AI, I think that's it. I think it's education. I think it's communication. I think it's a massive task in the coming years because the technology is moving so fast that even people who work within AI, they struggle to keep up with it. So what hope is there for, little old me who's trying desperately to sort of give a sane answer to questions about ethics? It's up to us to really think about our future. And like I said, and you said, everybody has to do it. It's going to affect everyone, just like the Industrial Revolution affected everyone. Every technological revolution affects everyone's jobs, everyone's way of life, everybody being politically involved. I think that's one of the positive things that's coming out of this sort of shake-up with the Greens and reform. Not positive. I'm not positive about reform, but I'm just saying that it's like we need a shake-up because the society that we live in has changed drastically. It's become possibly a technocratic society, and we need to reassess what it means to live in democracy and to take part. And, there's like really worrying figures of people not taking part and not seeing their role. And I think that contributes to the loneliness epidemic. It's not all about the technology. It's also about how, pushed out, really. We just, I think it's education. And I'm going to sound like Tony Blair, education, and, just sort of hyping up philosophy and critical thinking. And I think, with all these tech bros that are around that all these kids are listening to, I think there are many, many, many tech bros and people who work in technology and AI who have a far more interesting stance than the ones that we always hear from. And I think they should be really pushing themselves to the forefront and participating in shaping the conversation for young people.
I think your point about education and participation is crucial for this discussion because whether we like it or not, AI, the genie is out of the bottle. It's going to be very, very difficult to put that back, and it will have an impact on all of our lives, as you mentioned about different technologies and different kind of paradigms that we've existed in before. And I think we are either in the new paradigm and haven't figured it out yet, or just on the cusp of a new paradigm of how we work, how we live, who we are, what that means, and how AI will mediate that, I think is going to be important for our generation and the generations that come after us as well. But thank you so much, Alfrun. I think it's been a really interesting conversation and coming at AI from a lot of different perspectives, but particularly the role of drama, essentially, to just to think from an emotional point of view about these topics. So just to say that Dead Air is playing at the Greenwich Theatre from the 13th to the 16th of May. Make sure that the link for tickets is in the description of this episode. But Alfrun, thank you so much and have a lovely rest of the day. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.